friends, welcome to Embracing Your Season. My name is Paige Clingenpeel and I am the host. I hope you have been enjoying this podcast. As a reminder, as you listen to this, particularly on Apple Podcasts, we would love for you to review it, to subscribe, to follow at all the stars that you can think of. We want to hear from you. And once you do that, what is super cool is that it allows other people to hear about this resource as well. So leave a review, subscribe and follow, at least on Apple Podcasts. Check us out on YouTube, Spotify, and iHeart. All the platforms are available to listen to this podcast. We want to make sure that this resource is available to you and all your friends. Today, we have an amazing episode. We are interviewing Clinton Faupel. Clinton is the co-founder and executive director of RemedyLIVE, a technology-based nonprofit that produces interactive events and includes a 24-hour staff chat center that provides hope and live chat interaction for people that are struggling with mental health issues in their life. RemedyLIVE has had over 13.5 million interactions in its chat center and has impacted over 300,000 adults and children in its corporation-centered or public school events. We get to hear a little bit more about that during our interview. Now, I know one thing that Clinton is very proud of is that he has been married to Tanya and he has 4 beautiful kids. They're all teenagers now. When I knew them, they were super young, and it's crazy how fast they grow. I know you're going to appreciate this podcast. Stay tuned for afterwards when I'm going to share my 3 takeaways that I know you're going to benefit from. Clinton, I'm so excited that we are having this conversation today. I mean, we have known each other over a decade now.
It's been a long time, and I think you owe me money.
Oh, yeah. I imagine I do. Let's be honest. Yes. But what is so amazing is that you and RemedyLIVE was the first transition for me into telehealth, wow. Right? Talking about mental struggles for adolescents on a grand scale, right? And I think, I don't know if you remember, but I came on board, I was talking with a student that I had a counseling relationship with. She was your intern here, and that she asked me to come and talk about self-harm. And that's how I found out about RemedyLIVE.
I remember that day, and it was exciting because for us as a faith-based organization, just endeavoring to bring the hope of God to people, when we started realizing that we had a venue or a vehicle called mental health by which to do that in a world that desperately, and of course with the pandemic, has become very aware and needed it. I just have always loved those days where your voice became part of our voice. And I know now we all have these busy lives, but I'm so grateful that we get to reconnect here today on your podcast.
Yeah, thanks. So let's talk about RemedyLIVE. Let's talk about where it's come and where it is today, because some people aren't aware of this amazing resource.
Sure. So the biggest thing I'd want your audience to know, because I know you've got people all over the country, is that we are available to you around the United States. And not only the website, of course, at RemedyLIVE.com, but there's a short code that we'll talk about today. By texting the number 494949, we have a 25-hour-a-day center available for people to get support, parents to get support, kids to get support. And we'll talk a little bit about how now we're a 988 partner as well, which is really specific to suicide prevention. But the 494949 number is just really meant to be a place to help you. But Remedy started really as an experiment to say, could technology be used? Could the web be used to help people if they were looking for resources with just everyday folks, just normalizing the conversation around what we call secret struggle. And secret struggle is something that can be very generic to a lot of us. Some of it's issues around overeating and addiction. Some of us, it's addiction issues around use of drugs. Could be pornography. But a lot of us deal with issues that we isolate in and we don't tell people about. And thinking about your audience, Paige, I'm a parent of 4 teenagers. I know you've got your own. It can be such a shameful calling to be a parent today. And what I mean by that is that we believe that we're the only ones that are really bad at this, that we're terrible because we yelled at our kid, or we watched our child do something that we never taught them, and how dare they do that. And so we feel ashamed that it's our fault. And so our 494949 chat center, by texting that number, is available for moms and dads to know that there's people here that care, and we can talk through those scenarios, and in some cases just affirm that you're not crazy. These are things that we're seeing as trends around the country. We've had 13.5 million interactions since 2014.
That's amazing.
We've had incredible amounts of success working in the school system, collecting a lot of data. So when we hear parents talk about these issues, we're able to affirm you're not crazy. This is really going on in our schools.
I'm glad you pointed out the fact that all parents feel like they are the worst parents. So nobody else is struggling with this as well. And so that's one thing that Remedy does is they bring out that secret struggle. And they're like, wait, you're not the only one.
Yeah.
We have other people that have experienced this and actually have navigated through it. But the power is in the conversation. And that's what you guys offer with your chat line, which I think is great.
Yeah, it's so sad that, when we stay in our own head, which is typical as someone that's in struggle, the lies just exponentially grow, right? And it's the power of just even a text message. We laugh at this a lot, actually, that texting someone through our chat center begins to open the doorway of confidence and trust that I'm not alone. That somebody else now knows. And what our team is committed to doing is to make sure you're not alone. Affirming that, first of all, we're so privileged that you get to share that with us. It's mostly anonymous, like we're not really going to come to your house or track you down or try to get a donation from you. We're just simply trying to help you know that you're not alone. And then we're going to encourage you and find out ways that we can connect you with the community that you're involved with, whether it's out on the West Coast, it's the East Coast, or if you're right here in the Midwest, we want to make sure that you know that there's great places to connect.
So let's talk about teenagers and mental health.
Yeah.
Right? Like, have you seen with what you offer here an increase in some of these mental struggles that maybe teens are having?
Yeah, for me, I believe that if we go way back, and just to give you some context, Remedy launched the same week the iPhone came out. And so we've had a real parallel with this device. And I'm a geek, so I'll admit that I've really taken seriously measuring the way that anxiety levels have gone through the roof with the amount of screen time that teens are using to be able to say, do I matter in this world? Before 2007, it wasn't easy for us to really know what the other 8 billion people on the planet were up to. But now it's just like drinking through a fire hose every second of the day. And so I've watched it be very, very steady. I will tell you that anxiety is one of those areas that even talking about anxiety seems to cause anxiety. So we have to be careful of what we're really talking about.
Yeah.
But really what I mean by that is just an overwhelming sense of not trying, or better yet, overwhelming sense of trying to figure out how I fit. Do I fit? Do I like me? Do I matter? Do I need to do something to change that? And if I do need to change it, is it something that I can do that's quick, it's easy, that can help me get there? And so I think there's a direct correlation, for example, between the mental health of our generation of kids, not only with smartphones, but with the use of pills, with the use of, sadly, the amount of overdoses we see in our schools when it comes to experimenting with everything from Percocet and Oxy to now, so of course, fentanyl, just destroying people's lives. And so I just really believe that it's gotten a whole lot worse, and that's not easy for me to say. I run a nonprofit that does a lot of work every day to help kids, and yet I don't know that we've made a difference. I think it's just been that hard. And the great news about what I'm trying to get at is that I think mom and dad are actually the biggest part of the solution. I think family is the key, and I think faith in the family is essential. So I'm really, really grateful we can have this conversation.
Yeah, it is. And wow, I think, again, you pointed out that anxiety could just be rooted in not knowing who you are. Do you have value? And again, that's part of the conversations that you guys have with your chat line, is that they have that opportunity to be poured into and reminded of their worth and their value. But going back to parents, right? Like I think, and I do this as well, it's like my voice isn't powerful enough. My voice means nothing in my home, but in reality, it means so much. Our kids want to hear us. They want to hear what we value. They want to hear that they're loved by us. So you even pointing that out, I think is just a good reminder for parents out there to be aware of that.
It's funny the way you just said that, because I totally agree. But here's the magic that I found in my life. So I'm a dad. I have 3 beautiful daughters. So I've got this issue where I've got to figure out where I fit. And I found that the success I have as a parent is more in active listening than speaking.
Wow. Yeah.
I you know me well enough to know, Paige, that I have a really big mouth. I love to talk. I love to tell everybody that I know everything. The truth of it is I know very little except failure. I'm really good at that. And the biggest failure I think I've had in my Christian life as a quote unquote pastor for 30 years is that I didn't learn to listen earlier in my ministry. And I'm talking across the board, like every possible issue that we're seeing now when it comes to the church in America. I think a lot of it orbits around, have we been good listeners as church leaders? Have we been good listeners as parents? Have we listened to the struggles of our children in such a way that the bridge of trust is being built without us even having to say anything? I think time spent is one of the greatest assets we can ever give a child. Not just time spent doing like good things, but just fun things, like spending time present in a room with my child. So I think, when it comes to these issues about mental health, how are you is the first and most important question, and it's always got to be followed up, because it's always going to be good or fine. It's got to be followed up immediate with, no, seriously, how you really? I love you too much, sweetie, not to ask. And then just sit back, pay for the Starbucks, and listen. And that's been, for us, just some of the most precious moments with our high school daughters.
Yeah, gosh, I love that. So let's talk about some of the struggles that teens are facing, mental health wise. I think we as parents don't always know that there is a deeper level than what we're seeing or what our kids are showing or telling us. So help parents out there have those conversations, bringing up even just some of those hard emotions. How do you help parents have those conversations with their kids?
Well, I guess the thing that we've been able to watch is how many of our kids have friends that are struggling. Now, we're pretty screwed up family in that we're on mission in the mental health field. So our kids have, since they were embryos, have been kind of in this, so same with your kids, right?
I know, yeah.
So as I think about the average family in America, I think it's really asking the question, how is so-and-so doing? How is your friend doing? Because you'll find that, your children have, some real insight that you won't have as an adult. And I wish this weren't the case, but we've got way too many 13-year-olds giving therapy advice to other 13-year-olds in America. So we can get the perspective of our kids on how their friends are doing, and then use that as a really great gateway, and to say, well, how are you doing with that? Like, how would you, what's your guidance? What's your advice about that? Now, my son rolls his eyes when my wife asks that question, but when I ask that question, he actually answers. So mom and dad have to be on the same page. And then the other part of this that's beautiful, and I think you'll appreciate this, is you don't look for 30 minutes, look for 30 seconds in this conversation. You might only get a 30-second window to hear something powerful, but don't push it if it's not there. Because for me and for my wife, we want so desperately to hear from our kids, but when we get too aggressive, they just shut down. And so I take those moments that I get, those 30-second moments of honesty and transparency, where my child will share something that's going on in their life, and then I'll come back to that, in 8 hours or the next day. And it's just been amazing for me to watch how my kids say, you were listening. I just kind of threw that out there and you actually heard me. And now that they're older, there's been a couple of times when they've said, Dad, I really appreciate, or Papa in my case, Papa, I remember when you heard me, and I really needed to know that I was being heard in that moment, because I really felt lonely in that time. And so how do we take advantage of those 30-second conversations and not want to push it and get to the deep and the dirty, but just make sure that we're actively listening and we're coming back to it at a later time.
And again, you mentioned that before, just the success in parenting is seen more in active listening.
It is, and this is a marriage thing too, right? You and I have talked a lot about marriages over the years, that the best way we can honor our spouse is to say, what I hear you saying is, men are from a very different planet than women, and wives want to be heard, men want to be respected, and yet one of the things that I've learned is that we all just want to know that you're listening, like what I hear you saying is. And kids actually really value that. They pretend they don't care, but it's just absolutely huge.
So another unfortunate area that you guys experience is suicide. Yeah, kids, even in our area, in fact, in our school system, we lost a child to suicide recently. So any recommendations to even just have that conversation, preventative conversation with our kids, but also once that happens to a friend of theirs, or even your kids are younger, right? How do you have those conversations about suicide? Such a tough topic.
The biggest thing in our training, and this is me now, the trainer talking, don't ever be afraid of the conversation. It's got to be had. My heart breaks for family members that lose their children, and I wish I would have asked more questions. I wish I would have done more. So that's why I started earlier in this conversation with the "How are you really?" conversation. And I'm not going to wait till wartime to ask that question. I'm going to be asking that during the best of times, because I want it to be normalized in my family, that we're just that kind of family that doesn't allow how, the good, the fine, the generic answer, right? But when you know that your child, and this is the other part of it, is you and I know our kids better than anybody. If I'm going to be candid, sometimes we're afraid to ask the question.
Absolutely.
Because we do know our children so well. Something's not right with her tonight. I'm afraid of what she'll say. I'm afraid that, what if it is bad? But that fear has always kept me paralyzed to a deception versus motivating me to the faith of believing that I'm asking a question that's going to build, again, a deeper bridge. Now, I've sat with one of my daughters who has struggled at times with up to 45 minutes of silence. And that's deafening for a chatty Cathy like me, right? I want to be talking. I want to be, and not that I need to be, but I want to be. But I've watched how that presence in those hard times has created a great opportunity for a real deep connection that doesn't have a lot of words to it. But back to the question about taking your life, we have to remember that today's generation of young people really believe that suicide's an option. And it's not the kids who've got broken homes. It's not the kids who were raised with no income in their family. No, these are the high achievers, and these are the poorest of the community. These are the best athletes and the greatest valedictorian level kids. These are the types of kids that are what we would call human beings. And so every kid is susceptible to believing lies about their future, and we need to pay attention to things that we as parents notice aren't normal. They've stopped wanting to play a sport. They've stopped wanting to be connected to the friendships they have. They've started eating less. They're giving away their prized blankets and things to people. These are things that, easily just one at a time we could say, well, it's no big deal. But when you've been given the gift of a child, you notice these things. Never, ever blow them off. If you're a teacher listening to this podcast, your kids in your classroom, never blow it off. Again, it's an eye contact conversation. How are you really? And you'll find that in that moment when they answer it and they're lying right to your face and you know it, you can say something to them like, I just sense you're really struggling right now. Is that true? And you'll find that they will be willing to say yes. And then you can ask the most important question that I ask almost regularly, if not daily, to people in my life. Are you having thoughts of ending your life? You might think, well, he's got to be a great friend to have around. I've lost friends to suicide. I'll never again feel the overwhelming sadness and sorrow of losing someone because I wasn't aggressive enough to show them how much I love them. And all we want to do is love our kids, right? So let's love them as best we can by being honest. You and I can turn on our television set. We can look at our news feed. People are dying by suicide all over the country. In fact, we just got a stat yesterday that 2022 is our worst year yet as a nation. Wow. And that's among adults, but it's among people, and we need to be asking that question more and more.
Yeah, gosh, it's awful.
Yeah.
But again, I love the point that you have to address it head on.
Yeah.
And if you are, so for the mamas and dads out there that have littles, right, and talking about these conversations of just talking about it, talking about big feelings, talking about we are designed with big feelings, negative feelings, but that does not mean that we are, bad in ourselves. In fact, we're teaching our kids how to navigate that. But when it comes to those conversations like suicide, we have to address those.
Totally.
We have to take away that secret, right? The fact that it's keeping them in isolation. So I appreciate that, addressing it head on. Let's talk about the kiddos that have, because this has happened in my house. I know with Ryan as well, is that sometimes kids bring these big emotions about things that we're just like, are you serious? Like, you're not paying a mortgage. Like, you're not paying the bills. Like, this is nothing. This is just drama. And so I think it's hard for us parents to take a step back and say, I still need to validate this emotion, even though it's ridiculous in my mind. So let's talk about that a little bit, about like, how can parents validate emotions even when the issue seems minimal and benign?
Well, if we were doing a QPR workshop right now, I would say always listen to the person share their thoughts about the struggles they have. even if they're wacko, like alien from Mars kind of stuff. You don't have to agree with it, but by actively listening and validating it, the person that you're talking to is hearing you. And the key, I think, to our children is they're at and you know this better than anybody, they're at a place from a neuroscience perspective that emotions are running the show, right? When you and I say feelings aren't final to them, they're like, how can you possibly say that? All I am is feelings. Or sadly, they're numb and they have no feelings, and that's generally from trauma or something that's really bad in their life. But for the most part, kids today are so feelings oriented that they knee-jerk and make awful decisions based on negative or even just positive emotion. They do stupid things. So we as parents have to be able to help them kind of unpack that, release the pressure cooker, if you will, of that feeling, help understand it. But the hardest thing I think that I've learned as a parent is when I need to be transparent in the middle of that active listening to say, you know what, I've been there. I overreacted recently. I got really angry. I got really sad. I allowed that emotion in my life to really cloud my judgment. And so I'm so proud of you that you're telling me these things, because I don't want to let you do the same thing. And what I've done there is be transparent about my own humanity, but also been vulnerable to say that, you know, let's keep each other accountable in our emotions, right? You know, my son Duke, we both have anger issues, and so we keep each other very accountable. And sometimes it's kind of funny to watch, because sometimes you have to figure out who's the dad and who's the son. But we just have accountability around those emotions, because we know that we make very poor decisions with our mouths when we're angry. And so it's that type of commitment. And I think I'd say one other thing about this. Emotion, just by the very nature of the word, is what I call wartime. It's raw. It's powerful. It's like a raging torrent or a tidal wave. Try to have the conversations about emotions when you're not having emotions. I call that peacetime. So, for example, if sadness is the big deal, let's talk about the sadness when she's happy. Let's talk about the anger when he's not angry, because that's when they're more logical. And they're like, yeah, you're right, and create the peacetime plan. Like, how are we going to work? How are we going to deal with that next time you're really down, or you're really insecure about the clothing that you're wearing to school, or your weight, or whatever the issue is that your child is dealing with? Because peacetime, we can actually make some really good plans, and then we can call those plans into action when wartime hits.
Wow, that's a really good suggestion. I mean, there's neurochemical responses to those emotions as well. So then they can't focus, especially like teenage brains, right?
Yeah.
Not fully developed until they're 25.
Totally.
So it's like that prefrontal cortex where they're supposed to be making logical decisions isn't even developed. So doing that whole like wartime, peacetime, I think will have really great impact on your communication.
I've seen it in my own life with my wife and I, that, and you know this too, that when a husband and wife are having an argument, you know, if you don't have those pre-assigned rules of engagement, things can get pretty ugly. And so we've been able to benefit as a married couple, making sure that we know where the boundaries are, because we made those decisions in peacetime.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. That's good. So you can take this information and even apply it to your marriage, which is awesome.
Yeah, well, it's communication 101. And at the end of the day, with mom and dad and kids, like the family in general, I think the family is strengthened by healthy communication. Wouldn't you agree that we're all victims of being at Applebee's on our phones and being sad about the fact that we see the family in the booth across from us and they're all on their devices? I think if you're hearing my voice right now on this podcast, you know, just make a commitment that you're going to keep your devices, you know, in your purse, in your pocket, and next time you are with your family, you're going to have conversations and laughter and fun, and make sure that communication is the key. And communication for parents sometimes is always like instruction. No. Communication here can be you being a great listener too. So
yeah, that's great. So I also want to talk about the Get Schooled Tour. Will you tell us a little bit about this and why this is, I mean, I love this program. I think it's great, but tell us more about why it's important to have something like that.
Well, it shouldn't be needed. You know, there was a study done quite a few years ago that in our community here in Indiana, where schools thought parents were talking to their kids about mental health, And the parents thought the schools were teaching their kids about mental health. And we learned that nobody was talking to anybody about mental health. And then our suicidality rate in Indiana among teens is still really, really high. In fact, Raleigh Hospital, one of our major children's hospitals in our community, is just released a huge study along with a lot of TV commercials to make sure that we understand as parents, we got to have this conversation about mental health and about suicide. But the Get Schooled Tour was created to use technology so anonymous polling could give kids a chance to have a voice in how bad things were in their mind, or how they felt they needed to help their friends, what we call the friend up concept, to be able to make sure that we were stronger together through some really positive solutions or remedies, if you will. And so in an hour-long assembly or convocation, we're going to take live music, combine it with some really healthy instruction, but we're probably going to ask 70 to 80 polling questions, which sounds like a ton, but for this generation, it's nothing, because they just feel like they're constantly able to interact with this program through their device, and then the aggregate or live data is up on the big screen and they feel heard. So what we're doing, and again, if you can give me a little bit of a minute here with the Christian worldview, we believe that the Holy Spirit's sovereign over all that data, and we believe that courage is being mustered for a kid to admit for the first time perhaps that they've struggled so deeply that it's time to go from an anonymous screen into a real conversation with a licensed person like yourself in a talk room down the hall, or maybe later on with mom and dad. One of my favorite stories is a young woman who told her mom later that evening that she was really struggling with thoughts of suicide, and the mom immediately contacted us and thanked us, and actually did one of the videos here in our studio because she was just so grateful because she had no idea, right?
Yeah, that's
and now
incredible.
family conversation in their home is so different. But the Get Schooled Tour is designed to school students, first of all, they're not alone. And second of all, that we all are part of the solution. And normalization of mental illness issues only comes if we keep talking about it and being honest, being transparent, and sadly, maybe a bit candid and radical at times. And that's where maybe we have a bit of a reputation that we're pretty heavy hitting, but since the pandemic, I think we've served 150,000 Indiana residents, both with the Get Schooled Tour, and then there's an adult version in corporate centers, like in businesses, called the Wired Experience. It's not as loud and as fun, but it's being just as successful helping mom and dad at work learn about the importance of using that employment assistance program to take those 6 free sessions for their kids to therapy.
Absolutely.
And really make a difference with someone like you. So I just want you to know, if you're listening, the Get Schooled Tour is virtual as well as in person. And so if you're a parent that's engaged with your school system, we'd love to bring the Get Schooled Tour to your community because it's effective, it's data driven, so it's measurable, and it proves that it makes a difference. It's not just an opinion-based program like so many of the programs I've had in my lifetime. It actually can be measured as making a difference with kids.
Absolutely. And I've seen it. I've been a part of that. The conversations that were initiated because of this Get Schooled Tour, like these are things these kids are dealing with.
Yes.
So creating that opportunity for them to express it in a way, or even on the polling, like you said, like to see all your peers are experiencing this as well, and then normalize that struggle, which then allows them to communicate about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My heart breaks, and it's so fascinating to me, and I know I should know this by now, being a youth worker for 30 years, but it's just so many kids believe they're the only one dealing with this, and they may have even talked to their friend about it just that day, but they still believe they're alone in a crowded room. And there's something about that data, again, I believe it's a God thing that just shows them, I'm one of 31%, I can get out of my seat and I can go talk to someone. And then you've seen this with your own eyes, bringing a friend down to the talk room. That's beautiful because can I take you? Can we go together? Yes. I love the way that friends can friend up and really help their friends. Now, the school kind of hates it because math now is out of the question. English isn't going to happen this afternoon, but in some cases, lives are being saved that would have never otherwise been talked about if we hadn't have shaken it up through the Get Schooled Tour.
Absolutely. And let's talk about like the performance in school academic. Certainly that's important, but they're not going to be able to focus or improve even their lives as a whole without addressing those core issues.
That's totally right. And I think of an event that I did in North Carolina not too many years ago where it was an urban school. I thought we'd lost the crowd, to be honest. It was like 600 kids in the gym, and it was just nuts. It was so loud. And I ended the event, and the kids left. And the principal, who was fairly new to the school, ran down and said, "We need a second room. We're overwhelmed." And I was shocked that the kids wanted to go to a talk room because it didn't seem like they were even paying attention.
Yeah.
But he said to me, he thanked me, and he says, "If we don't get their head right, how can we expect them to learn? And I wish there were more school administrators like that.
Absolutely.
I know they're pressured by the different government education systems we have throughout our country, but we have really got to pivot education to be not just about academics, but also about mental wellness, because so many kids today, they are not able to engage in high academics because they're dealing with such difficult mental health issues, especially since the pandemic.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Gosh, I love that. So let's talk about how people can find your resources.
Yeah.
I know we mentioned the 494949 chat. What other ways can they connect with you?
Yeah, RemedyLIVE.com. There's a resources tab there you can click, and there's all kinds of things. There's a great blog that's almost daily with all kinds of great features. There's really, really powerful stories, testimonies, both of teens and of adults there that you can look at and watch. But I think the biggest resource is just the living organism known as the Chat Center. It's available to anyone. It's free of charge. We know we live in a world now where counseling sometimes can be a 2 to 3 week wait. We're to a 2 to 3 second wait. You click the button, you're chatting. We're not counselors, but we have found that the normalization of mental health conversations needs normal people having them. And so because we're trained in a lot of the things that need to be clearly trained in, like suicide prevention and just really good active listening skills, we want to be able to give you the value of knowing that you're not alone. And then again, if we can help you find other resources, because you might need specific things in your community, what I love about our team, we call them soul medics, is the soul medics will help figure out how to find you those solutions. And they take it pretty serious. We're not 211, but we're pretty close at times with trying to find you exactly what you're looking for. So yeah, give that a shot later on tonight if you hear this.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time and talking about RemedyLIVE. I'm a huge advocate of you guys. I love what you do.
We love you.
I've seen it change lives. Like, what a blessing. So
thank you,
but thanks for joining us. I'm glad everyone here listening got an opportunity to hear more about what this great organization does. Please take advantage of it. Tell your kids about it. This is also for your teenagers. They can reach out to this chat line anytime, because if you're asleep at 3 a.m. and they're having these dark thoughts and they need someone to talk to, this is a place where you can send them. So, hey guys, I hope that you enjoyed that podcast with Clinton Faupel. Isn't it cool what RemedyLIVE offers, not only to you, but to your kids? What's important to know is that the chat line is for 13 years old and up, but it does offer the opportunity, especially in the middle of the night when your kid has no one else to talk to a trusted adult who is able to add value and remind them of their value and worth. So you probably picked up on some really cool takeaways. I would love to hear what you took away from this, but these are the ones that I have. First one, when we stay in isolation, it increases the lies that we believe exponentially. Basically, that's a big fancy way of saying when we are alone, it is harder to fight our struggles by ourselves. So RemedyLIVE, again, an amazing resource that we can use in order to get out of isolation, to address the mental health struggles, to find that community. But there's also resources maybe in your neighbor, in your friends, just opening up and sharing that you are struggling with something, I guarantee you will help you navigate this season of valley and darkness that you might be experiencing. So that's takeaway one. Don't live in isolation. Second one, and I love this so much, one of the best successors of parenting is active listening. Did you hear that? Just listening is one of the best predictors of health in your relationship with your teen, with your child, and even with your spouse. These are great things that you can do. And guess what? It doesn't even take much effort. You are purely just listening. I know in previous podcasts, we talked about the power of sitting side by side, maybe even avoiding direct eye contact. Because let's be honest, teenagers are like rabid animals and they get a little overwhelmed when you are aggressively staring at them. So sit side by side, listen to them explain what's going on in their life, and you will find they'll open up a whole lot more. So active listening can increase the success of your connection with your kiddo. I also appreciated his wartime and peacetime. You know this, parents, you know this, teen workers, that when teens are in this drama meltdown, they are not going to hear anything that you have to say. So even though you could have the greatest wisdom in the whole world, they aren't going to listen. Instead, after they have had that experience where they're heightened emotionally, now they're in what Clinton referred to as a peacetime, they're able to take maybe some constructive feedback. I love asking them, how can I help you next time when you're in that emotional state? How can I help you when your friend betrays you? How can I help you when you failed at a test? Like whatever the drama is for your kiddo, asking them when they are calm, how you can come alongside them to love them well in the moment when they are heightened, that can really transform the interaction that you have. And then finally, make a commitment to get off your phone when you're with your family. That's huge. And I get it. And I know that our kids are going to want to be on their phones. I know that we're going to want to be on our phones. But recognize we have our kids in our household only for a short amount of time. We get to parent them. We get to love them in such a powerful way. This is a blessing for us. But if we're distracted by outside influences like phones and TVs and other entertainment, we're not actually engaging with them. So take this as a source of change and make a commitment today that when you are with your kiddos, you're intentional with them and you actively listen and you love them well. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed this podcast. I know that I have not only loved hearing again about what RemedyLIVE has to offer, all the resources, but I'm definitely going to go home and I'm going to connect with my kiddos. I'm going to actively listen, hopefully not talk over them as per usual, but it's going to be a way that I can connect and love them in a deeper way. I hope this podcast has been encouraging and it has equipped you. I can't wait to talk to you next time.